go ahead and call this meeting to order at 7 o'clock on Wednesday, March 10th. Our first in-person board meeting in about a year, I believe. So thanks everybody who came this evening. Beth, could you please call the roll?
Mr. Bodie?
Here.
Mrs. Gebhardt?
Here.
Mr. Gousset?
Here.
Mr. Truitt?
Here.
Ms. Wassman?
Here, and happy Women's History Month.
Excellent. I'll ask everybody to please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance and a brief moment of silence following. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. All right. First on the agenda, recognition of academic achievement and outstanding contribution. Do we have anything under that tonight, Mr. Paul? Well, at this point, we'll have recognition of guests and hearing of the public. Once again, as a reminder, the board recognizes the value of public comment to school governance. If you wish to address the board, you may approach the podium now or directly before the action item you'd like to address. A copy of the board policy is in the agendas that were provided this evening. A few reminders: when addressing the board, please state your name for the record and address. Limit comments to 5 minutes or less. Direct statements to the board. Do not mention students or staff by name, and maintain reasonable decorum. So with that, do we have anybody for public participation this evening? I guess I should ask if we have anybody before I read that. So, construction update, Mr. Tadina.
Good to go. Good evening. Glad to be back here in person. One very cool update this month is that we were honored to be able to participate, Quint, in the middle school's time capsule celebration, which was really neat to be a part of, and a great reminder of what we're building and why, and got to have a couple of students come in, and I know a lot of the classmates put in something that is going to be opened in 2071. So great to be a part of. You know, as far as construction update goes, with the warm weather, I hope that you've seen the west side of the new middle school along Oakland and the beautiful windows. Kudos to Perkins and Will and Moody Nolan, because, you know, doing construction, I can tell you that that elevation and your exterior facade and the windows look beautiful. And so got more of that coming with this weather. And on the inside, you can really see a lot of things taking shape. And so we've actually started doing what we called Tour Tuesdays, or we'll have tours of staff and of students as they can see what classrooms look like, what layout looks like, and start to, you know, visualize curriculum and things like that. Upcoming, we're actually a few more accomplishments on the interior. We've actually started painting some of the classrooms, actually starting in the 8th grade wing, working our way 7th, 6th, and then we'll make progress with drywall still down on the first floor. And coming up, you know, this month yet, we'll start to see some ceiling grid go installed, like the ones above us, with, well, obviously brand new, and with light fixtures and things like that. So we're really starting to see these finishes come together. We also might, in the month of April, we'll see some casework be delivered and start to be installed as well in the science rooms and in the classrooms. Starting next week, there's, you know, Sean and I were joking, but there's been a lot of layers to our truss roofs out there, and finally the last layer, the shingles, are starting to be installed next week. So that's great news, and a long time coming as well. We're looking ahead with the district, and we're trying to communicate and receive feedback from you so that we have a really good plan as we transition this summer, as the school year ends and we start to move into the new middle school. We don't really have any COVID-19 updates as far as delays or impacts as a result of that goes, but we're monitoring those, and it's been I mean, like you've witnessed in your industries as well, you know, just keeping manpower high and keeping everybody engaged is what we'll continue to push for this last push towards the end. I think that's pretty much it for an update for construction, and I'll leave it up to any questions that anyone might have.
Any questions or comments from the board? Well, Jay, thanks for all you're doing. I mean, we get feedback from the administrative team. As exciting as the project's been, this summer is really the first time we disrupt and transition our staff and students, and it just sounds like there's a lot of really good communication going with that.
Yeah, so if I may, couple things related to construction. One, we actually have a meeting tomorrow morning, Friday morning, about the transition that will occur in July with staff, and it's a pretty comprehensive transition plan. We've also had our first meeting with the city about staging and fencing and that transition timeline as well. Additionally, on our board agenda, albeit a little separate from construction, but certainly related, we have a significant purchase for furniture. That furniture purchase was months and months of planning to include secretaries, staff, teachers, classified administration. And so this is a culmination of a lot of planning and work. And so that also is on the agenda. A special thanks to Colleen Kress, who isn't here, and Jay Tadina, and Quint Gage and Sean Hinkle for the event that we had yesterday. I'm drawing a blank. Time capsule. That was real. I was able to attend. I know Kevin was able to attend, and I think perhaps because while we used to have these kind of events and student engagement regularly, I miss them. And so yesterday was just a lot of fun. And then back to construction, we did a tour, I think about, 10 days ago-ish. And I was in the building yesterday, and I'm just telling you, even in that time, the difference is so significant because, as Jay said, they're beginning to drywall and paint. So you can really see the classrooms coming together, and the difference is just remarkable, even in the 10 days from when last you were in. And then the final thing, we've done 7 hard hat updates, and in this time frame, because the changes are so visible, we'll continue to do those.
Yeah, I just following up, Colleen and Chris and Jay, thank you so much for it turned into a site tour. I mean, it was a full-on, we were doing the time capsule, and we ended up, the kids went upstairs, they saw every room in the building, and they were so excited. That type of community engagement is huge. So thank you.
Well, I mean, we're pulling our hair out, trying to make this major milestone of turning it over, and when we get to participate in things like that, it lifts us up. So we appreciate that, the gesture there, and if we can continue to be a part of that in any way, we'd love to. And Colleen is awesome. She just jumps in and does a great job of leading us and representing our whole team. So.
Also, a special shout out to Haley Head, who helped coordinated giving cookies and chocolate milk and white milk to all of the workers. Was that last Friday?
It was
last Friday morning, which was a huge hit, and a great collaboration, and put a smile on all the workers' face. And what is obvious and true is those guys work hard. I mean, they work hard, and so that gesture under Haley's leadership was really great.
Agreed. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Jay, and it'll be fun to kind of see the transition. I think about this, we've got teachers that haven't changed a room in decades, and you're shifting them to complete different buildings just for a year and back, and I mean, it's a lot, and I'm glad you guys are handling that with such care, so.
Have a good evening. Thank you.
Thanks, Jay. Mr. Culp, I believe the next one, I'll let you take it away.
Yeah, so Mrs. Olam, let's start with you.
Can we start with high school?
Yes, how about we start with Robert, Mr. Brown?
Can you sort of give just an overview of what
Yeah,
what we're doing?
so what we try and do, thank you. So as you know, we spend a good deal of time as a leadership team and then as a governance team preparing our continuous improvement plan. And we began that 7 years ago. And the whole purpose and focus of authoring that continuous improvement plan is to have a narrow set of annual objectives that we are able to hold our collective organization accountable for and to. And along that line, we want a narrow set of annual objectives that are an inch wide and a mile deep, as opposed to a mile wide and an inch deep. And when there's unity of purpose and focus, we're able to move the proverbial flywheel and make progress. Furthermore, when there's vertical integration and unity of purpose and focus, and we're all in it together, is when organizations are able to really be successful. At the core of all of this is the continuous improvement plan. In an effort to be transparent and demonstrate evidence of progress made towards our collective authored annual objectives, we have principals present to the board tangible examples and evidence of progress made towards those stated objectives. And so this presentation has to do with our work around enhancing and refining our curriculum to build perspectives and understanding among our students. A different way to think about it is, when you think about the end in mind, so our portrait of a graduate and what skills and dispositions we want for them to have to compete in a global world. One of those is an understanding of racial tension, an understanding of different cultures, of different religions. And so we have authored an objective with tangible action steps about that. And so the presentations that you're going to see today from high school, EILMS, and Stevenson are tangible examples of that stated objective.
Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for allowing us to present tonight. It's hard to know where to look. At the high school this year, we have two exciting initiatives, and the first one is a Credit Flex course titled Social Activism, Restorative Justice. And we are implementing that course and creating it at the same time. And the way that we're doing that is it's entirely student-led. And so every time that the class meets, they are creating the course. And we'll talk more about that in a second. The second initiative is called the Bobcat Anti-Racism Collective, or BARC for short. And I'm happy to announce, I'm honored to announce that we have two student leaders here from BARC who are going to do a much better job of explaining these things than I will. We prepared a short presentation for all of you. So without further ado, we have Nina Brown and Maggie Herlihy, two of our junior student leaders, to take us from there.
Okay, I'm Maggie Herlihy, and I'm a sophomore at the high school, and I'm passionate about this because BIPOC communities are being deprived of basic human rights, and I believe something needs to be done about that.
And I'm Nina Brown, a junior at the high school, and I think it's important to break the silence when talking about race and to bring much needed change into our community and to communities like ours.
At the high school, there are currently two avenues for anti-racism. One is the independent study, which you can actually receive course credit for.
And BARC, the Bobcat Anti-Racism Collective. Both of these are outside of what is currently being changed of the curriculum. So, yeah.
Nina and I are not personally involved with the Race and Justice Independent Study. However, there are 16 students and 8 teachers that are. The independent study is divided into 2 smaller cohorts, and within each, groups are pursuing self-designed projects that revolve around race and justice by meeting regularly. The 2 cohorts are education, the learning about anti-racism, and activism, the actual doing aspect of anti-racism. Within the education cohort, there is a group learning about the weight and impact of microaggressions, and the other is improving their ability to navigate difficult conversations. The Activism Cohort includes a group dedicated to increasing diversity, another one that is devoted to amplifying BIPOC artists via art shows and magazines, and the last is actually preparing to engage the younger students with the help of justice-themed activities.
So, BARC is an extracurricular club that Maggie and I are both student leaders in. And while it has a similar goal to the independent study of celebrating BIPOC individuals and cultures and bringing awareness to injustices, we approach this in a different way and also encourage conversations about race. We regularly post on our Instagram to uplift marginalized voices and to educate ourselves and our following, which consists of Grandview community members and students. And we host various events such as a webinar through OSU with the Charlottesville Chief of Police to challenge our ideas, and phone banking and letter writing events to provide students a place to use their voice. This club has only been going on for a year, and what I'm most excited about is the future of it. We have many bold plans in the works currently, such as a film series and speaker series event, which we wrote a grant for, and it will help provide a foundation for the club and sustain it in the future as more of the student body gets involved. Thank you. Do you have any questions?
Any questions or comments from the board?
I'm looking around.
What's the Instagram if we wanted to follow?
Bobcat Anti-Racism Collective. I believe there's an underscore in between each word.
Yeah.
Well, on behalf of the entire board, I just want to thank both of you for coming out this evening and sharing this information with us. I know with this all being spread out and in mass, which, you know, we're kind of used to at this point, certainly want to express that, I mean, genuine gratitude, and just really have impressed with what you and your peers have done.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Does anyone have any questions? Okay. Oh, I want to echo what Mr. Truitt said. It's nerve-wracking to get up in front of people and speak, and microphones are my least favorite thing in the planet, so thank you for doing that. Bravo for taking initiative, looking at the world and saying, how can I make it better? Like, here's a problem. And instead of letting it defeat you or just going along, saying, let's do something about it. From the bottom of my heart, I really want to say thank you for the work that you're doing, because it's trickling down. The little homies, the little kids, they're watching the big kids take on things, and you're inspiring them. And also, this is going to seem really weird, but you're inspiring the old folks in the room that here's a teenager tackling the world's problem. I need to get off my tail and do it. So I want to say thank you. I didn't actually have a question. But thank you for the work that you're doing. It means a lot to the community, and it's one thing, but you'd be surprised. You'd be surprised how much that impacts.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Katie Conrad. I am a new third grade teacher at Stevenson Elementary. And I apologize for being a little bit late. I assumed this was on Google Meet, and I did not read Haley's email all the way through. So I'm sorry, you did send me the information. That is just my fault. But I'm here now thanks to Angie's computer and a short commute, because I live right next to the movie theater. So let's see, is this AirPlay, or does it go in through an HDMI? It's AirPlay. It's AirPlay, okay. Okay. All right, lovely. So this video is of two of my third graders, Nina Lount and Josie Tingler. And I asked them to just speak on a couple of the picture books that we've read this year that are from Harper's Corner. So Harper's Corner, some of you might know, is a collection of books that we now have in our media center at Stevenson. And a lot of the titles are focused around social justice and just exposing students to picture books that might be representing people and groups of people that maybe they don't always have in their lives or maybe they don't see all the time. So they chose these three books that they're going to speak on, and they just did such a great job talking about what they've learned and what discussions we've had in the classroom about these books. So I really am seeing a big impact on these books and how they are affecting our students, and I'm here to talk a little bit more about how I let my students run the discussions after reading books like that and to follow up a read aloud. And so I have been a part of the Project Zero team this year, and we focus a lot on taking the teacher out of teaching and making sure that our students are the ones talking and not just us putting our ideas on them all the time. So it's pretty simple. All I do is I include these thinking routines from Project Zero into my read alouds. So these are just two of the ones that are from Harper's Corner. We've read probably 5 other books from Harper's Corner, and I have plans to keep using them throughout the rest of the school year. But these are my 3 main thinking routines that I use with my students during these read alouds. The first one we focused on with Lift As You Climb. It's called Main, Side, Hidden. And that thinking routine is all about saying to the students, who are the main characters, who are the side characters, and who are the hidden characters? And when I saw that prompt, I thought, do they know what side characters or hidden characters are? But they were able to find the main characters and the side characters very quickly. And then one student spoke up and said, you know what, I think the hidden characters are all those other people that were involved in this story that we didn't read about. And then there was a whole discussion about who was alive during this time period that Ella Baker was working. What did they maybe feel? What were they doing when all of this was going on? And it just really got them to take perspective of many people that weren't just in that book, not just Ella Baker, not just the students she worked with. And the conversation went on for probably 15 minutes with probably only 3 or 4 times of me jumping in and mediating a little bit. See, Think, Wonder is a very common thinking routine, and we did this with the other side because what students notice and what they see is that there's a fence on every page of that book. And until the end of the story, the girls are on either side of the book. So one girl is on one page, one girl is on the other. And it's not until the end that they are on the same the same page of the book. And the students noticed and were wondering, why now? Well, these 2 girls that were just neighbors growing up, they decided we're not going to let this fence separate us anymore, and we're not going to let our parents tell us we can't play. And so Jacqueline Woodson purposefully illustrated it so that the girls are now on the same page of the book. And the students noticed that, and they latched onto that really well. And the last one is Unveiling Stories. And this is, again, another higher level thinking routine. But it's basically just asking students, what's the story, like what's the main story, what's the story of the world, what's the story of the community, and all of these other stories that are going on within a book, similar to Main, Side, and Hidden. And what I found is using these thinking routines during a read aloud, it's a whole lot less planning for me, and it's a whole lot less of me putting my ideas onto the students and just seeing what they came up with. So I've been having a fun time using the Harper's Corner books and these thinking routines with my students, and I just want to continue to use these same routines with them because they're familiar with them, and it's showing them how they can think creatively about picture books. So that is what I'm doing in my classroom, and it's a lot of fun. Does anyone have any questions?
Any questions? Could you please let your students that participate in the video know that all 5 of us really appreciate them doing that and got a lot out of that?
Yes, I will. They were very excited and very proud to talk about that.
That was awesome. And thank you again for coming out this evening and sharing.
Yes, thank you for being patient with me.
Very much appreciated.
I'm often caught off guard by, I'll read something, and then like with my students in the classroom, they'll be like, oh, it's this and this, and I'm like, didn't see that coming. Just, it was over my head, and I think I know things.
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel comfortable sharing maybe what was the most profound thing that a student said to you that not you weren't prepared for, because we're teachers, we're prepared for everything.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe that was, you had to, like, I always push back in my chair, like, wow, thank you. Do you have one of those that you would feel comfortable sharing with us?
Sure. So actually with Lift As You Climb, when we were talking about unveiling stories and doing the hidden characters, some students were speaking up to say, I wonder if all of the white people during this story were racist. And I just thought that was a pretty, that just showed, wow, is this our view of how people used to be? And so we had a conversation about how not all white people are racist, and that led into a very deep conversation. And I don't think I was maybe mentally prepared to get into that conversation that day with the 8-year-olds, but I'm glad they asked, because that just shows that there's a misconception in the back of their head, and they were brave enough and comfortable enough to bring it up, and that we could have that conversation and make sure that they understood, no, we're not going to make these large groups of people and just assume that they all acted one way. But that definitely was one where I was caught off guard, but I said, we're going to talk about this, we're not going to just move on for the day and go to writing now. We're going to make sure that we spend the 10 or 15 minutes we need to unpack this. So that's definitely one that caught me off guard.
No, that's so awesome, because it's the beginnings of not what to think, how to think.
Mm-hmm.
And that's education right there. So
Yeah.
I'm like, thank you for the work that you're doing. But I loved it when they were just like, because I know the story, and I was like, yeah, wow, yes, you all are doing awesome, but thank you for the work.
Yeah, thank you. I love reading them. I'm happy I'm supported in a district to read books like that, so that's a good feeling. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for coming in. I feel like in years past, I've been able to volunteer in the classroom a little bit and kind of get a feel for what's going on. And in Grandview, where everybody knows everybody, and you're a newer teacher, I feel like I know what it's like to be in your classroom. Thank you. That was great.
I feel honored to teach in this district, so thank you for saying that.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right.
Okay. So, back in January, when we were asked to do this, we thought this was going to be a virtual meeting as well. So I asked Carl Acton if he wouldn't mind putting something together based on some themes that he's been exploring in his language arts class with our 7th graders. They picked the book Stamped by Jason Reynolds and Ibram Kendi as a book to study in the fall, and that theme kind of ran itself through to the theme that they just studied was a utopian kind of themed unit that they just finished up. So there are some 7th graders that created a movie that Chris is going to show that kind of talk about their experience in both in studying kind of that Stamped from Beginning book, and that how that led into a utopian unit that they just did. So again, it's Carl Acton's 7th grade language arts class and several students from that kind of sharing their work.
my name is Tatum,
Hi, my name is Caroline,
and this year I read The Hate U Give.
and this year I read #NotYourPrincess.
So this book is about a boy who was killed for something that his life shouldn't have ended with. And this book shows how the best friend who saw the whole thing happen and knows what really happened, how she dealt with it.
This book is about Native American women speaking their truth and talking about their experiences as a Native American woman, things that have happened to them, maybe discrimination that they fought against, and it's just really inspirational.
This book taught me how it's like in the real world, and that's very important for me as a young woman growing to be an adult, and I need to know how those things work. And now I know that I need to speak my truth when something is unsettling or I know something about anything that's bad or that I have seen.
And this book kind of taught me about some things that are happening that I haven't even thought about or considered yet, and how so many lives are so much different than mine that I just haven't even considered it.
Not only have we learned all of this, but we've learned so much more. We even read The Giver recently, and it was just such a great book. And, well, we do not have only done that, but we just have enjoyed class in Mr. Acton's room. So thank you for your time.
Hi, I'm Betsy, and in ELA we're learning about Utopia, which is a perfect place. And this is my Utopia slide, which is a perfect place for me. And in Utopia, there would be no coronavirus, and I'll be able to hang out with people without work. And there would also be equality, inequality. And then I would also be best friends with Timothy Chalamet, and there would be no racism and free healthcare.
My utopia would, I feel like I'm in a utopia when I'm playing soccer, and that's my team, after we won a game. And then every human would be equal. There would also be no poaching the animals. The government would be well organized, and there would be no riots. Also, no one would be hungry, poor, or homeless. My utopia would not have any discrimination against someone else's race, beliefs, or anything else. No one would be allergic to anything, and everyone would be able to get a job if they wanted to. In ELA, we did a project where we read books about racism. And there was The Hate U Give, which was about a boy who got killed by a police officer for nothing. And it was about the fight against racism.
Yeah, and you can also make stuff for it. Like, these are some movie posters that people made, and I think it's very important to learn about issues like racism at a young age, because I think it's a very important thing in our society.
Hi, today we're going to be talking about 7th grade ELA and how it's one of my favorite classes.
Mine too, me too.
Well, one of my favorite things is how he made us do these quotes. Here we have our quotes and drawings. Now, I did these types of quotes, and these are the drawings. Our whole class participated in this. One of my favorite quotes is this one. If a child makes a grammar mistake, they're hit really hard with the discipline one, which was a thin, flexible weapon that was stung painfully. The excerpt, the author writes, "We had a silent asterisk."
Many books Mr. Acton has had us read. One of my favorite parts is the morning part where we do our stretches.
Yeah,
and
it's
we
really
do breathes, and then we do this at the end. That's pretty fun.
Yeah, it's really fun when he lets us choose LED lights in his room.
Yeah, and then he reads a precept to us. Very inspirational. That's it for the morning announcements.
Thanks for listening.
Okay, are there questions for Dr. Gage?
No question. I don't have any questions, but I just want to say, watching like all three of these, we have some really great kids in this district.
Yes.
And great teachers, obviously, because, you know, they go hand in hand, but that was awesome. Tell Mr. Acton we liked it.
All right, I will pass that along. Thank you.
If we can do more board meetings with all just
Yeah.
this, I'll make an emotion. I'll second it. I'll do it all. But no, it's so, I love students and they're little quirky. They're awesome.
Well, you know, thank you for that, and that certainly does, you know, make us desire to be able to have the kids there in person. But once again, thank Mr. Acton and his students on behalf of all, the entire board. Sincerely, we would appreciate that. You know, I have a 7th grader that's in that class, and I'm impressed with the richness of the conversations that my 3rd graders will bring up at the table around some of these topics. And he honestly can speak to it better than my wife or I could, and it's you know, it's just really impressive when I think about myself at that same age and what I was interested in thinking about. So it's you know, it takes a village, and there's the school's a big component of that. So to all you, thank you. It's a real testament to the work, you know, K-12. And did you have any other comments? You know, I just want to say briefly, and I shared with the board, we have copies of the resolution we passed in February, and you know, I just want to speak really quickly, you know, to what that is, and you know, frankly, what that isn't. We've gotten some good feedback, and I think feedback and dialogue are important in any community. Some I agree with, and some that I don't, quite frankly. You know, when the board passed the resolution last month, and when I reread the resolution and look at specifically, it's to support the work the district has been doing and has been doing for a long time. And so no matter how you feel about that work, you know, we've gotten some comments that the board radically changed the curriculum all of a sudden. And so I think there are good discussions, and I think there have been meetings with constituents and community members that hopefully have been productive, and I hope that continues. I mean, hard topics take good discussions, and everybody comes from a different point of view. But I do, you know, the one thing I want to say is, you know, the resolution is to support the work that's been going on for years. It talks about affirming the importance of the curriculum and didn't actually implement a curriculum change, or quite frankly, a goal change or a CCIP change. Not that we may not eventually do that, but that wasn't what happened. You know, I just want to be clear for that, and you know, I for one, you know, support the resolution we passed as it was written and presented, as we all do based on our vote. But I just want to be clear, you know, what it is and what it isn't. And certainly when we have curricular changes, we rely a lot on our teachers and our administrators to you know, do the work and make the changes. We don't tend to, as a board, just bring something forward and vote and change the path of the curriculum. So. I don't know if there's any other questions or discussions around that. So.
As a point of process, typically with resolutions, they're posted in the board agenda, which is posted 24 hours at a minimum in advance of the meeting, and it's voted up or down. Policy, we have first reads and second reads. So with this resolution, it was brought before the community, and then we voted on it. So there was, because I think there has been some conversations about, I didn't know this is what was going on. So just kind of to point out the process of a resolution as opposed to a policy, as opposed to anything else. Typically they're one reads, we vote them up or down, or we've been crazy enough to not even vote them up or down, just say no thank you, and go from there. But with that, just to let the community and people know that process, this is how resolution policies are first reads, second reads, that we do through that, so those take a little bit longer. But just to kind of make it, it's a learning experience sometimes when you're like, oh, I didn't know that was happening, and then we're all like, it already happened. So moving forward, just with resolutions, to make the community aware. And I echo everything that Mr. Truitt had to say also.
If nothing else on that topic, we have a slew of minutes to approve. I believe that all 5 of us attended all 4 of these board meetings, so I'd entertain a motion for one motion to approve all 4 sets of minutes included in the packet.
So moved.
Second.
Discussion?
Jesse, just before going on, I was really impressed. I mean, it's always a good job, but there was a lot in these, and I found myself thinking, there were a lot of touchy subjects in there with the decision to go back, and I wanted to make sure that what was captured was what I intended. And reading what Beth, you had captured, just did an excellent job. I think you said, you encapsulated what I wanted to say better than I think I actually said it. And so I could tell you were listening and really paying a lot of attention. I think that just, there's a lot of board meetings and other types of meetings that, I've been a part of in the process, and typically minutes are, very shortened, but excellent job. I mean, I would put this up as, as good a job as any I've seen. So just, more than any, it's always the case, but it really struck me this time, just what an excellent job you do with these, so thank you for that.
Thank you.
Here, here. Was it 10 pages?
Oh, it was quite a bit more than that. It was long. It was a large part of the board packet, I know, and I read it too, and I agree. If you weren't able to watch it, or I think you got what happened at the meeting by reading the minutes, which is of course what's always intended. But I agree. It was awesome.
Well, of all the public records we create, whether it be a YouTube video or these meetings that we record, I mean, at the end of the day, the written approved record is the record of the meeting, and so it's more important that that's accurate than anything else. So Beth, can you call the roll on these beautiful set of
Mr. Bodie?
Aye.
Mrs. Gebhardt?
Aye.
Mr. Gousset?
Aye.
Mr. Truitt?
Aye.
And Ms. Wassman?
Aye.
That's not one to take a compliment, so I'll be real interested in the next minutes how she writes up her own praise. Building and department reports included in the packet, very similar to what we talked about, Beth. I find that those building and department reports are, although they may not be policy rich from a board standpoint, really help give me a sense of what's going on in all those areas, and really appreciate the effort that goes into those. Any questions or comments from the board on the building and department reports that were provided? If not, Andy, you're up.
So I'm going to begin by just revisiting the fact that we will be all in on Monday, which, it almost is a year to the day of when we went to virtual learning, which is a little crazy, for lack of a better word. I want to give a special thanks to our administrative staff, our custodial staff, our maintainers, all of our classified staff for continuing to adapt and prepare for our all-in return. I think I speak for everyone on the board and throughout our entire organization to say that this past year has been unprecedented for everyone, not only in a school setting, but around the world. But in our microcosm of our world in Grandview Heights, it has been unprecedented and challenging in a myriad of ways. I wanted to let everyone know that we have continued to sharpen our saw and adapt. And one of the steps that we've taken K-12 is purchasing small desks, which has allowed for us to better distance than the table settings that we had. So while there still are going to be instances where one or two students in a class aren't 3 feet, we have enhanced that further than the diagrams that you saw at our last board meeting, which is a success and a celebration. I do also want to be very clear to the board and to everyone that while I can't foresee into the future, it is my strong belief that the reality of our all-in return will bring more quarantines, both modified and real. Going from 3 hours a day with half the students on an AM/PM rotation to an all-in is going to bring more quarantines. It just is the reality of our situation. So I know I feel like I have said this, 100 times, but I want to say it 101 times. If anyone believes that there aren't going to be more quarantines when we go all in, I just think they're wrong. And so I'm not trying to be an alarmist, but I also don't want to be, when potentially we have significant numbers of quarantines, which I hope never happens 3 weeks from now or 4 weeks from now, I don't want anyone to be shocked or dismayed or surprised, because the reality of our situation is that likely will happen. And, the other thing I want to say related to this is there have been several schools in Franklin County that have returned all in. And so there are recent lessons that we can learn from. And suffice it to say, those districts that have gone all in have experienced an elevated number of quarantines. Again, both modified and full quarantine. So a modified quarantine is between 3 and 6 feet in school, a cumulative of 15 minutes, where you would be able to continue to attend school but be quarantined for the balance of your life. So you couldn't participate in any sort of extracurricular after school or any other event outside of the school day. A real quarantine, which would be less than 3 feet, cumulative 15 minutes, is both for school and outside of school. And one of the things that I am hearing from other superintendents who have returned all in is that even in school classroom settings where the desks are set 4 feet apart or 3 feet apart or 5 feet apart, there are still close contacts of under 3 feet, because even the very best kids, even the very best families who are compliant and eager to please adults and just great kids and great parents, those kids want to be close to one another. And that is and will be a continual challenge. And so I say that to say that as a result of that reality, it is certainly possible, if not likely, that we will have full-blown quarantines in and all in return. And so I say this again just to be clear that we are anticipating that happening. Now, having said that, we are continually preparing and sharpening the saw to try and ensure all of the really important mitigation strategies in terms of mask requirements. We've actually even modified our mask policy to include the gator masks aren't allowed in the school setting. Hand sanitizers throughout the entire building and in every room. We will be 6 feet for lunch, which is a huge celebration. And we will continue to monitor all of those protocols and procedures diligently. So I wanted to readdress that for the board and everyone so that there was clarity about that. Turning the page, I am excited to share that Brian Stork was able to meet with 8th grade students to begin talking about their schedule for next year, which is very exciting. As everybody knows, we are scheduled to return to All In on March 15th, which is Monday. And the good news is, I will say, there is a general excitement also about that reality among our staff, among our teachers, among our classified, and among our administration. We were able to discuss the time capsule, which was a really neat event. And again, I appreciate Kevin also being there. We did put up a new scoreboard in the K-12 athletic complex. That scoreboard, I have learned as we were researching purchasing a new one, was the oldest one of the oldest current existing running most times, scoreboards in the state of Ohio. Interesting tidbit. Special thanks to Amber Nichols for her continued leadership in the area of mental health. I will tell you, and most all of you know, my wife works in this arena in mental health for Children's Hospital. I do think that one of the unanswered questions and things that we certainly have been very attentive to and very intentional in trying to ensure that all of our families and students are safe in focusing on their social, emotional, and behavioral well-being. That is going to be something that we're going to have to continue to watch. And we are committed to doing that. I was able to watch your good band, Charlie Brown. I know Mr. Bodie's son was in it. I actually attended the one where he didn't get to be, I believe he's Linus. But I thoroughly enjoyed that, and it was really great to be able to have a live audience, albeit significantly modified, for those student actors. And it's always a celebration, one of my favorite things to do each and every year.
And it will be available online? the
Yes,
weekend after.
in 2 weeks, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the link, I think, is included. There's some really rich links in here, and Ms. Head intentionally posted this document as part of our board packet, and so if you're interested in accessing some of those links, there are hot buttons on the webpage, so you can easily access those.
Any questions or discussions for Mr. Culp? That was a lot of information.
I have a question. I don't know if you're able to answer it or if anyone here can, or maybe get back to me, but just with regard to going back to school on Monday, and there's a lot of excitement, there's a bit of anxiety, but I was curious about a couple of things. One, if there were, by now the estimates should be turning into hard numbers about kids going home for lunch versus staying in for lunch.
Yeah.
And then also how the Florida virtual numbers have changed. And I know that that's a challenge, and I've heard a little bit of feedback from some parents about the difficulties in switching to Florida now, but I was just curious how those numbers might have changed.
Yeah, so why don't we start, Jamie can talk about Florida Virtual, and then Angie, Rob, and Quint can talk about the lunch. And I think they could, maybe not exact, but next to exact.
Sure.
Yeah, that's a great question. So at this point right now, I've transitioned one student from like what would be our hybrid model to Florida Virtual. We're talking with another family that's still making that decision. On the flip side, though, we've had 9 families transition from Florida Virtual to now the full day traditional. And a couple of those families are clearly planning to lunch at home. And then I want to just say that thank you to Angie and Quint in particular, as we looked at, some of the challenges are that our Florida Virtual families have been able to be a part of our related arts programming at Stevenson, and now that those teachers are going to be teaching a full day, that's much harder. So I think that led into some of the conversations about, again, transitioning back to a traditional model. So at this point, the answer is I've had 1 student transition to Florida Virtual, but we've had 9 students transition from Florida Virtual to traditional starting March 15th.
Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah, very.
So I have 45 going home for lunch for the 50-minute time period, and the majority, 22 of that, is 3rd grade going home, which, thank goodness, because now I only have to have 2 lunch spots, because I was going to have to use the library as a 3rd. So those 22 kids really saved us. Now I can get everybody in the 2 spots. But 3rd grade is our largest number.
So currently, there's 8 students who have told me they want to stay for lunch.
Yeah, I figured with high school, it's a little bit different.
I need an exact number, it's 8.
In a couple weeks, it'll be 0.
Yeah.
We're kind of a moving target, and it's changed a little bit each day. We have 75 4th and 5th graders staying for lunch, and then the rest of them are going home, and about around 80 6th, 7th, and 8th graders that are staying for lunch. The rest are going home. So what our capacity in our cafe as we build it had 66 in the cafe, but we're going to use the commons hallway to add those extra seats. So we're able to have 2 lunch periods instead of 3. We're going to have 2 half-hour lunch periods, and instead of 3 20-minute lunch periods, which will allow teachers to get a half-hour lunch, aides to get a half-hour lunch, everyone to get a half-hour lunch. And so 4th and 5th grade are going to eat from 11 to 11:30, and then they're going to go to 4 essentially COVID pod recesses. And so they will be able to have a group of less than 20 students in a classroom, and then we're going to rotate them from either classroom space to playground to gym. And so there'll be 4 spaces where those recesses will occur. And then vice versa for 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, we'll have essentially 6 groups of so 2 per grade level, recess pods, and then they'll all eat in the lunchroom together at 11:30. So that's kind of how our lunch recess is going to be working.
What percentage is that? I can't do the math in my head.
I would say it is probably 60% going home, 40% staying here. And I was hoping for 50-50, so we got a little bit better than that. So we have more space than I anticipated, which is why we were able to have a 30-minute lunch instead of 20-minute lunch.
So the younger the students, the more likely they are to stay at
Correct.
school, pretty
Yeah,
much.
I think we have like 21 8th graders and 40 4th graders, and somewhere in between for the rest of the day, staying for lunch.
Well, I know, when it comes to all the kids being back, one I think is interesting that we often talk about, there seems to be, for good or bad, there seems to be a lot more concern about the number of kids who will quarantine as opposed to the number of kids who will be sick. Which is good in that it means that we think we can keep kids from getting sick, and that's obviously always the goal, and that's wonderful. And then quarantining just is very disruptive, so you want to keep that to a minimum. Even if the kids aren't sick, obviously, we don't want them to quarantine because we don't want them to miss school. But the scariest part of the all-in is obviously lunch, but even more so to me, recess. Because I know you said that the tricky side of that, particularly for the little kids, is like in your classroom, you could say there's 2 kids who are within 3 feet of you, but at recess, it's like, sorry, all 20 of you have to go home now. So anyway, it's nothing that can be done, but it's the scary part.
So one of the things I have learned specific to playground is I was under the impression that the 3-foot distancing modified what didn't apply to the playground, and I have subsequently learned that it does.
I saw that. Yeah, I saw that you had written something that clarified that. Yeah.
Okay, and the other thing I want to say specific to playground, because I have the same worry, is Quint, Angie, and I, not so much Rob, have talked about playground, and one of the other strategic intentional mitigation strategies we've used is this podding. In other words, it's going to be the same 8 to 12-ish kids together, so that if that does happen where there's close contact, it at least mitigates it from being a bigger issue.
Well, our dashboard looks good right now, though, right?
Boy,
It's pretty good.
It
hope
sure
it
does.
stays that way.
It sure does.
In the event that we have quarantine, are there like 6 or 7 carts available to move into classrooms for teachers to?
Like remote teaching setups?
Exactly.
Yeah, we have our plan, and we're putting those together this week, are 5 per building.
5 per
So
building.
we should have 5 of the remote setups per building if we have to have teachers teaching remotely.
If necessary. Great. Okay, thank you.
One thing I'll mention briefly, I was going to do this under policy. At the last board meeting, we talked quite a bit about potentially adjusting the face mask policy. Subsequently, Mr. Culp and I looked at that policy in more detail, and it actually, as written, as already approved by the board, gives the administrator the leeway to make changes as far as best practices. So, for example, the things we've learned about gators, and even if midstream we learned something else about masks. The policy basically says we'll have masks. You determine what's appropriate. So that's why that's not here, because it's a guideline change that's within the authority the superintendent has. So there's no need to make that change. But I know after we talked about the last board meeting, we got some positive feedback about doing that. So I just wanted to be clear. We weren't not following up just upon further inspection. There's just a different way to get to the same end goal. So that's why there's not a face mask policy change on this agenda. So. Any other questions for Mr. Culp and his superintendent report? All right, Beth, you're up.
I'm going to connect my screen up to the screen behind Kevin to share my updates. Okay, so that looks like it's coming up here. So I am going to share the financial highlights through the end of February, and then I've got a couple just other explanations I want to provide on a couple recommendations on our agenda tonight. So starting off, looking at our general fund, as of the end of February, we had received about $6.5 million in property tax advances. That represents about 92% of our fiscal year budget of taxes. So the final settlement from the Franklin County Auditor's Office is expected later this month. State funding, we're at about 72.2% of our budget, and that's a little higher than what we initially expected for this point in the year, and that's because of a portion of our state funding being restored through the governor's executive order. Property tax allocation and Grandview Yard settlements will both come following the tax settlement that I mentioned should be later this month. And interest for the month was about $2,200 in our general fund. Looking at expenditures, our fiscal year-to-date budget is about 66.7%, and our expenditures are at about 63.2%. So we're a little bit under budget on our general fund expenditures. And then a quick update on the investments. The core investment balance that we have with U.S. Bank, the average yield is about 1.4%, and Star Ohio still remains at less than 1/10%. So we're doing everything we can to maximize interest earnings, but it's a pretty tough environment right now to do that. So the construction fund had interest earnings for the month of February of just over $15,000, and our project to date interest earnings net of the fees are $1,268,221. Soft costs were just about the halfway point spending those, and our construction costs were about 26.3% of our budget. And our fund balance is $39.7 million. The bond retirement fund, I mentioned these couple points last month. We've got a couple transfers coming up in April, and that represents TIF revenue that we're going to be using for debt service. We will do one transfer from our general fund into our set aside or our reserve account, and then we will also be transferring money out of that reserve into debt service to actually make the payment that's due in 2021. And then finally, the permanent improvement fund, the fund balance is $840,000. This fund too has received some tax advances, about $234,000. And then a couple updates on the current needs out of the PI fund. Andy talked about the scoreboard. We've talked about the stadium sheds. The high school roof, there's a recommendation on the agenda tonight for approval for that. That estimate has increased to about $250,000, and that is because it's going to include replacement of 10 skylights in the high school roof. So again, that recommendation is on the agenda, and it has been vetted through the core team as well. And then the final item, and this is something new, also vetted through our core team, is an updated HVAC control system. While that is included for our new 4-8 building and the renovated high school, the system that we have represents a pretty significant security risk due to the age of it. And so there will be an expense of about $31,000 to update that system for the next year and a half for EILMS, and then also for Stevenson. So that is something relatively new, although we have been talking about that for quite some time. And then just a couple quick updates, things on the agenda tonight. You'll see a tax rate resolution to approve our tax rates for the fiscal year 22. And if you remember back to our tax budget hearing back in January, I included this kind of list of steps for the budgetary process, starting with our tax budget that was adopted in January. And so right now, I just kind of wanted to show you where we're at on that list. So the first 4 steps have been completed, and we're at the step where, you know, by April 1st, the Board of Education needs to accept those tax rates. And while most of those tax rates are kind of an automatic calculation, in particular, our bond millage rate is not, and that takes some planning and some collaboration with the Franklin County Auditor, making sure that we have enough to pay our bonds and making sure that that aligns with our bond millage model that we've developed. So that's just a quick recap, just to kind of show you how that process all ties together. And then a couple other things that are on the agenda. There are some budget adjustments, and these represent final Department of Education allocations that happen this time of year each year. So those are pretty routine. And then also, we need to approve the budget for that new ESSER 2 funding. So you'll see those on the agenda. You'll also see a long resolution to participate in an electric purchasing cooperative. And just to give you a little bit of background, you know, this is only done once, maybe every 3 to 5 years. So we participate with over 150 other schools. We're in the Meta group. There's a couple other large consortiums that we pulled together to negotiate electricity rates, you know, using that buying power and that volume to negotiate rates as low as possible. So the current contract that we're in expires next June, and so this is the initial step so that consortium can start the bidding process. So it's a resolution to participate in that, as we have always done. And then finally, there is a recommendation regarding class of 2021 scholarships. So the senior class this year has a larger than typical fund balance because they did not have prom last year. So the senior class officers got together and worked with the advisor and with Mr. Brown and came up with a recommendation that they wanted to use some of their funding to fund scholarships for their, you know, members of their graduating class. And so we have a board policy that does allow that. I put a reference there, board policy JL. And I also talked to our auditors to make sure that they didn't see any issue with it, and they recommended that we have the board approve that. So that recommendation is on for tonight, 6 $500 scholarships, and those will go through the same process with the scholarship committee, a group of teachers and the guidance counselor, reviewing applications and then making selections. So that's all I have. Unless there are any questions.
Questions or comments for Beth on the financial report?
Do you know if the bill that was just passed today, the newer stimulus, will have any impact on our finances?
I do not know yet. I will let you know.
I know it just passed today, so I don't expect you to know it all yet.
Once I know more, I'll share that with you.
Sounds like a good finance committee exercise to really dig into that next week and let us know.
I have a meeting on Monday, so yeah.
Well, thank you, Beth. I appreciate that presentation. There's no other questions for Beth. Could I have a motion to accept the February 2021 financial reports and payment of the February 2021 bills?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any other questions or discussions? Beth?
Mr. Bodie?
Aye.
Mrs. Gephardt?
Aye.
Mr. Bousset?
Aye.
Mr. Truitt?
Aye.
Ms. Wassman? Aye.
We have 3 items under curriculum and instruction, 2 sets of supply lists, and then the CAP agreement for Kenyon College. If I could have a motion under curriculum instruction A1 through 3. So moved. Is there a second?
Second.
Any questions or discussions about those 3 items?
I do have a question about the supply lists. I noticed that there was a price difference between male and female students in first grade, which I thought was odd. I mean, honestly, it's like $4. However, seems kind of.
Angie, can you help me out here?
No, probably. Well, I mean, usually they have male students do, or go ahead, Angie.
Yeah, it's like usually like wipes, but I can look at that.
That's absolutely what it is. It's wipes versus tissues.
Yeah, so I can balance that out.
I just think, yeah, to have it balanced between the genders, I think would be better.
Yeah, I think they just always slid them and didn't think about it, so I will look. Thank you.
There's a $1 difference too in kindergarten it's like between A and M and N and Z. I don't know, it stuck out to me.
Okay.
It's nitpicky. I will definitely admit that.
That's okay. That's all right.
Quick question, I guess Andy or Angie, does sort of averaging that work? If we...
Can you make it work?
Yeah, I can make it work. I just have to call the company and have
make
them.
a motion on that?
Eric did.
I think I did.
I think I second.
I mean, you can do what you want, if you wanted to amend that.
Yeah, could I amend that to make sure that each grade level has consistent pricing?
Yes, within the range of what was presented? Is that, sorry, I'm not trying to put words in your mouth.
Yeah, end up with the same dollars collected.
Yeah.
So.
All right, and a second on the amended motion.
Yeah, I'll second.
Sure.
Okay. Thank you, Kevin. Any other questions or discussion?
Just, I did have a question, and I should remember this from before, but, so the Kenyon agreement, so number one, good thing to hear about that. Beth, just on the financial side of that, I'm trying to remember, is this something that without that agreement, there's a standard a way that the money flows, but with this agreement, it's a little different. And I'm assuming that is better for us, but I just wanted to ask you about that.
So there is a standard for College Credit Plus, and that can be superseded by a written agreement. I do not know specifically in this agreement if, I'm not sure what was negotiated in this agreement. So Andy, I don't know if you know specifically, I'm not sure.
No, I don't
So
know.
it can be, yes, to answer your question, Eric, that agreement would supersede what would be standard without it. So I'll follow up and let you know in particular with this.
I mean, it looked like a pretty low cost. I think we are taking on the cost of the books, but the credit hour cost seemed quite low. So, I mean, it looked like a good deal for us. I was just trying to remember how that worked.
Okay, yeah, I'll double check.
Jamie might have some insights, Dr. Lusher.
Yeah, $40 per credit hour. That seems pretty fair.
So I would just say that with all of the partnerships that we have through Kenya and Ohio State, we really work to try to keep it like a very low cost to the district and families. Where it does become challenging is sometimes the textbooks. They select a different one every year, so we have to work with like Follett or some other companies to be able to, turn those in for at least some money back to the district. But in terms of Kenya and Ohio State, any of those partnerships, the cost associated with the College Credit Plus is really, it said brashly, good bang for our buck in terms of students. With the Kenyon program in particular, what's great about it is that it's a very safe opportunity for our kids because they essentially get to choose either the College Credit Plus or take the AP credit so long as they get the 3 or above on the test.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Lusher.
Sure.
Good questions. Any other questions on those 3 items? Beth, call the roll, please.
Mr. Bodie?
Aye.
Mrs. Gephardt?
Aye.
Mr. Doucet?
Aye.
Mr. Truitt?
Aye.
And Ms. Wassman?
Aye.
No action under board policy, but we do have first read on 2 non-discrimination policies and a human relations policy. I didn't know if there were any questions or discussions of the board on those policies as presented. If not, we will take action on
Special
those.
thanks to Sean Hinkle for his leadership in facilitating that, Kevin Gousset, Molly Wassman for serving on that committee. I know you both share, as well as Sean and my tremendous joy, so thank you.
Before we move on, with some of the non-discrimination, and this is, I'll open this up, and I'm probably going to ask for feedback from the leadership team. To me, when it's non-discrimination, especially when we get into gender equity, we have gender equity, and then we also have trans students, things like this. Can we talk me through, from your perspective, because I have my own, if we do pass this at a second read, does this affect things such as colored robes for graduation that typically fall along gender lines? Does this affect women's chorus? Because if we're non-discriminating and we have, you know, there's non-binary, there's trans students, there's things like this, putting them in a gendered graduation robe, are we violating our own policy by our traditions? So I don't know, and this could be a total thinker question where it's come back to me, come back to us in a month, but if this is something that we do accept, would our traditions, so to speak, be violating our own policies? Does that make sense? Maybe that is a thinker question, but.
Yeah, I guess, you know, the question I would have is, first off, I think it's a broader conversation to include, you know, our students, for example, you know, our high school principal.
And secondary's on my head.
So that would be the first thing that I would want to get feedback from them. I guess I'm not sure that a decision about robes, it would be a violation of this policy. But I think that it is, irrespective of that, a worthy conversation to have with our students.
And I'm certainly, you know, not an attorney, but the way I read the policies as presented, I would agree with your analysis that it doesn't force a change in certain areas. However, if it's something we would like for Andy or myself to ask that question through council, we could certainly do that to sort of vet that out and have those answers by the time we vote at the next meeting.
We've had to me, I tend to go the most, if there's non-discrimination, especially when you get into the world of trans and non-binary and things like this, it opens up the question across the board, is gendered anything? And there is no right or wrong answer, but I think it's one of those, let's have the talk. Let's get into it. It might be uncomfortable, and this to me brings about a lot of, there's traditional things we do. Are we doing them because they're traditional, or are we like, and people hold, you know, prom, and I'm very secondary in my head, these things very close to their heart. If we do, and this is an if, I think that this does involve a deep dive into this. I would love student input. I don't know how we go about this. I don't know if that would require maybe a tabling, because it's like, there's a lot to this from my perspective, that it's, if there's non-discrimination, it's across the board. And it's something that, oh, it's okay, you know, there's, I've talked about that, but I love student impact, I love your impact, or not your impact, your input. I love other board members, because I don't know if I just unleash something that maybe you're like, oh, Molly's thinking her things again. But does this, and I am supportive of it, I will be honest, but if we do this, it's opening a can of worms, so to speak, and I think it's a good can of worms to open. But does this maybe warrant some deeper dives, some deeper discussions?
Well, I would propose, based on those comments, sort of a two-tier approach. Number one, if we could make sure that by the next board meeting, we have some real clarity around what the policies as written in this first reading, the implications of those policies. Like I said, I don't believe they have the implications, but I don't want to go off that. So let's vet that and have those answers. So that's number one, and then the board, can decide if that's something they want to approve at that time. And then number two, if we want to enter a process to have more in-depth discussion about those policies, we can do that. So even though in my mind they're related, we have an agenda item in front of us now. I think that's the approach to take to that, and then that would allow us to if we would decide to vote and approve what's written at the next meeting, that doesn't limit you from continuing to have discussions about refining or changing that policy a month from now, 6 months from now, a year from now. So is that a reasonable approach? Okay.
My concern was it's not against the policy as written, but if we are passing this policy, does that policy affect X, Y, and Z? Does that make sense as to what I'm saying?
Sure.
It's not I'm not saying no, but I think we have, I think, one of the best so far non-discrimination policies in the area. And if it's just words on paper, why have it? I mean, we saw some great presentations. Our kids are learning. I think we need to hold ourselves to the highest standard and to the most accountable for the policies that we put, which is probably why I'm on the policy committee. But with that, because this one, there's a lot of room for interpretation. So that's where I wanted to put that out there, because I wrote the note, gendered anything. Is that going to be a problem if we pass this? Which I'm not saying do or don't, but things like that. But I think Mr. Truitt that's a good idea.
Okay.
It kind of reminds me of earlier this year, the change that was, if I'm not mistaken, student-led to the homecoming court.
Mm-hmm.
That same idea, but, and obviously that was without this change to the policy, but I feel like these are problems we can work through as a district, because that worked out really successfully, I think.
And, obviously in the policy world, there's really two things that happen, right? I mean, you change policy to change practice, or oftentimes, practice changes and it's like, oh, we need to adjust our policy. I mean, I think that's kind of how we like it to work, frankly, is that you're coming to us and say, hey, we're really going down this path, can you support us with the policy, as opposed to sort of a top-down, let's make these policies and make everyone sort of deal with the consequences. And so we'll do that work. Andy and I can work together to get the clarity around the impact of that policy before we would do the second read and the final read at the next board meeting. Thank you, Molly. Any other questions on the policies first read? All right, we have 8 items under business and finance. If I could have a motion on business and finance 1 through 8.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
A couple important points in here. I mean, although we've talked about this and neither of these things are surprises, the first 2 items, carry a price tag of over $1.5 million. The furniture we've talked about extensively, and you have all the information in front of you. I do want to talk briefly about the roof replacement, and why we're in the middle of a capital improvement project and we're taking that money from PI funds as opposed to the project funds. Really quickly, because I think that could potentially be a question. And so historically, and Beth, correct me if I have any of this not quite right, but the high school roof replacement that's here was in line to be done to the high school before we added on the new middle school. And that was part of the PI budget at the time. And so because of that, it wasn't factored into the building project budget. And then once we got into it, from a warranty standpoint and just using the same contractor on all the roofs, it made sense to sort of push that work back and do it now here, as opposed to doing it before we even started and then having a, renovated building that would essentially have a 5 or 6 year old roof on it that's just going to have other things done to it. So that's not, that's always sort of part of the plan, and that's how that's moved forward. But that's why, I think we as a Board of Finance and Committee have tried very hard not to tap the PI budget for the building project. And I think this still is in the same spirit of that, even though we're kind of sitting, why are we renovating a high school with a bond issue and spending PI money on the roof? Well, really, I hope that explanation makes some sense. But it's a $250,000 expense, and I think it's about half of the year's PI budget, so I think it's worth the discussion. So with that, I think Beth sort of explained most of these things. Is there any other questions on C1 through 8?
Well, just to be completely clear, although I think it has been clear, the roofing project, nothing in this amount that's being done will be undone and redone through the construction process. This is like a one and done, and it's good with the new building.
Right, and it carries the same warranty.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of work on this.
Right.
The amount of attorneys involved in this is a little bit crazy, but part of the reason was we wanted to use the same roofing contractor, and so because of how we had to legally bid all that. And then we also wanted to, and that also has the whole roof be the same system, the same contractor, and the same warranty throughout, which when you really get down to it, makes logical sense. But when you start looking at how it's funded and the timing, it was complicated to put it together. So basically, this PI expense always existed. And this PI expense would have existed and would have happened had the bond issue not passed. We got to keep the roofs somewhat repaired. The cost has gone up a little bit because we're replacing the skylights at the same time, but it's all within that same range. So, and the furniture is an exciting piece. I think you've all seen all those packets. That's a real sense that we're getting there, right? That's fun. When I was the principal here, I used to say, the great thing about Grandview kids is they take really good care of the furniture, but I could never replace these old 40 and 50-year-old desks because they were still in really good shape, even though they didn't fit kids and they didn't work real well. So it's exciting to sort of have a clean slate and really have a furniture package that matches, I don't mean matches how it looks, but just matches the design of the building and the collaboration and the learning style. So, and I know there's been a lot of teacher and administrator input all the way along, and student input, I believe, on it too. So.
And how does the furniture, what was the set aside anticipated to be versus what it actually is now? It's
17,000 over.
17,000.
I think it's 16.8.
Thank you for the specificity.
There's 200.
It's not 17.
Go.
And just to be clear, the way the budget's built, I know you know this, Emily, but just for general, that doesn't mean the project budget's over by 17,000.
Yes.
We have some contingency here and there. Andy and his team went back and sharpened a saw, and basically, if we hadn't spent that money, we'd be buying cheaper furniture that would break, or we'd just end up buying it out of building budgets in the next year or two anyway. So, I think the core team felt comfortable with that increased expense, and it is a relatively small percent of a $1.3 million.
No, it surely is.
Not that $17,000 isn't a lot of money, but we didn't.
Well,
there was a lot of work.
Yeah, and we did start well over 17 over budget. So that being 17 over budget was a process to get to also.
So we should feel good that you're not further over budget than it is.
Well, that's what maybe I was trying to say.
Are we still on time and under budget?
On time, on budget.
Well, we're on time, on budget.
No, I think it's perfectly fine and warranted. I'm kind of admittedly obsessive over budget creep, but I don't think that we've been guilty of it. I think that we've done very, very well.
Yeah.
I do, not that I don't love a good budget talk, because I do. I do want to say, and Mr. Brown, can you please thank the class of 2021 for taking money and putting it to good use? Like, I think if we needed a reference for our CIP, right here it is. These are kids that are thinking forward thinking, and
they're embodying what we're teaching them. So I want to say, and I'll be so bold as to say on behalf of the board, this is a kind gesture, and it is amazing that we have our generation is doing. I'm
Yeah,
going to stop talking and let you talk.
No, I will thank them. I just wanted to add that, and this fits a pattern with our students, because I see it time and time again, but they didn't just have the idea. They had the form written, they had all the logistics figured out, they had everything was done. They really wanted to make this happen. So not only is their heart in the right place, always, but they actually put the effort in to make it happen. So I thank them every day for something. So
I was like,
I'll add that to it.
I say it, and I'm gonna make myself sound real old, but this next generation's woke, and they're amazing. And maybe it's just I like to think it's just our Grandview kids, but so I'm like that's awesome that they think to do these things and they execute them, which is the skills that the educators have. I'm gonna quit talking because I could go for days, but thank you.
Any other questions or discussions on business and finance items 1 through 8? Beth?
Mr. Bodie?
Aye.
Mrs. Gephardt?
Aye.
Mr. Gousset?
Aye.
Mr. Truitt?
Aye.
And Ms. Wassman?
Aye.
9 items under personnel. If I could have a motion for D 1 through 9. And if we could throw maybe the volunteers on there, E1.
So moved.
Second.
Eric.
Eric, did you second? Yeah. Okay. Questions or discussions on the items in personnel or volunteers? If not, Beth, will you please call the roll?
Mr. Bodie?
Aye.
Mrs. Gephardt?
Aye.
Mr. Gousset?
Aye.
Mr. Truitt?
Aye.
And Ms. Wassman?
Aye.
Do you have any other items?
I do. I want to just mention prom and graduation are, Mr. Brown, it has a committee of students, of parents that are working on both, and nothing has been decided. So first, let me just start with that. Nothing's been decided. And that you can count on Mr. Brown and I to weekly give you updates on the status of those discussions and kind of where we are. So I wanted to just let you know that nothing has been decided, but we are in very good hands, and I do know enough to know that there's few principals that I've ever worked with in my career, my 23-year career, who are more methodical and collaborative and well-planned than Mr. Brown. But the other thing I just want to say is it seems to be I mean, this isn't going to come as a surprise to you, it's like everything else, a dynamic landscape when it comes to both. And even so dynamic that I don't think even I could present the latest and greatest thinking around what they are and aren't allowing or considering allowing for either. But my sense is there is and I'm just, this is just what's being discussed. Again, I'm not making a recommendation. We're not there yet, but I want to give at least some a heads up that the prevailing view is to try and do something. What that looks like, I don't know yet, but we will continue to keep you up to date on a weekly basis about those two topics.
I appreciate that, and certainly, we want to do as much as we can for our students, but I think your description of the dynamic landscape is 100% on it, and frankly, as we've learned, the guidance can change on a dime, and so, we've said all along, just because our kids are all going back Monday, things aren't necessarily normal, and there are still quarantine protocol we have to follow, gathering protocol we have to follow. The governor has indicated that around graduation or proms there may be more guidance, but we'll need to follow that guidance. So there's a lot of uncertainty there, and just we trust that you and your team will follow all the guidance that we need to follow to get there. I think that's the for me anyway, the most important piece is that we sort of don't go rogue based on what we're told we should do.
One more thing, and this is more just, I need to be heard. Because the landscape is so dynamic, and I know I speak for Mr. Brown, well, really everyone, it does make it really challenging to plan, because what you don't want to do is make plan C, and then 2 weeks later, and you announce it, and then 2 weeks later, you realize you could do plan D, which maybe is better for kids. And so it does present real challenges, and so I share that with you more just so.
And the opposite's also true.
And the opposite's also true.
Once you say you're going to do it,
you don't want to
you're
say
taking it away.
plan D, and then you realize really you can only do plan C. So it is a lot more challenging, probably not that you all understand, but I just wanted you to know that we're doing our very best to keep up with all of those changing requirements, and also trying to keep students at the center of all of our decisions.
The only other thing that I have, and honestly, I'm not ready to have this discussion tonight, but this board had a work session at one point, sort of in the lull before we got into the learning modality change discussion, and we were doing a lot of good work there, and frankly, when it comes to the capital project, there's going to be some decision points coming up. I believe that packet on the site plan went to all board members. So that's just, I know that was just a lot of information. I asked for the printout of that, and so we just gave it to everybody. But particularly look at that, we're going to have to dig into that at some point, and I would propose doing that as a separate work session, with that being the only topic at some point. So if we could at the next board meeting sort of bring our calendars and think about what date would work. For me personally, between now and then, it's not great, and I think we're okay time-wise if we don't. But even though spring's crazy and we have a lot going on, and we're in this, the work doesn't go away, right? So we're going to have to dig back in and kind of pick up on those conversations where we left off in that last work session. So I just wanted to plant that in everyone's mind. So, any other items from discussion for any other board members?
You want to call executive session for fun?
Nope.
Okay.
Motion for adjournment?
So moved.
Second.
Beth?
Mr. Bodie?
Aye.
Mrs. Gephardt? Aye. Mr. Doucet?
Aye.
Mr. Truitt?
Aye.
And Ms. Wasserman?
Aye.
All right. Meeting adjourned.